caught my second wife in bed with my son-in-law 6 days before he was supposed to give a toast at our family Thanksgiving. I was already halfway down the hallway with a fireplace poker in my hand when somebody yanked me into the linen closet and clamped a hand over my mouth so hard I tasted copper. It was my daughter. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't crying. She just leaned in close, smelled like the same vanilla shampoo she used in junior high, and whispered, "Dad, don't. I've known since August." And then she said the part that turned the floor under me into water. "It's not what you think it is. It's so much filthier." If you've ever loved somebody for so long you forgot to check whether they were still actually there, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button before I get too far in. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I'll read every one of them. I always do. My name is Theodore Brennan. People who like me call me Teddy. People who don't call me Mr. Brennan, and there's been a lot more of the second kind over the years than the first. I'm 68 years old. I spent 41 years building a regional trucking and logistics company out of a single beat-up Peterbilt I bought at auction in 1984 outside of Allentown, Pennsylvania. By the time I sold off my majority share 2 winters ago, Brennan Freight had 412 trucks running between Philadelphia and Cleveland, and a name that meant something on the loading docks. I thought I'd earned a little peace. I should have known better. Peace is what they tell you you've earned, right before they take everything you have left. It happened on a Sunday night in early November. The house was quiet the way houses get when the heat kicks on and the dog finally settles. We lived in a stone colonial outside Bryn Mawr that my first wife, Eleanor, and I bought in 1991 when we were still figuring out how to be people with money. Eleanor passed in 2014, pancreatic. It took her 9 months, and I spent 6 of those months sleeping on a cot in her hospital room because I couldn't stand the idea of her waking up alone. After she was gone, I rattled around that house for 3 years like a marble in a coffee can. Then I met Marlene at a Penn State alumni dinner, where we were both seated at the leftover table for widowed donors. She was 51 then. She laughed at my dumb jokes. She didn't ask what I was worth. She brought me a Tupperware of chicken and rice the night I got back from Eleanor's headstone unveiling, and she didn't say a word. She just sat next to me on the porch and watched the dogwood drop its leaves. I married her in 2018. My daughter Caroline, who's 36 and the only kid Eleanor and I were ever blessed with, walked me down the aisle herself because she said somebody had to make sure I didn't trip on the carpet. Caroline didn't trust Marlene. She never came right out and said it, but I caught the look she'd give when Marlene laughed too long at something that wasn't funny. I told myself my daughter was being protective. I told myself she'd come around. She didn't come around. She did something a hell of a lot smarter. So, this Sunday night, I'd had 2 glasses of Cabernet with dinner and gone up to bed around 9 because my back was killing me from raking the side yard. Marlene said she was going to stay up and finish a book club novel. Around 11:30, I woke up because my mouth was dry as chalk. I reached for the water glass on my nightstand, and it was empty. Marlene's pillow next to me was empty too, and cold. The blanket on her side was folded back the way somebody folds a blanket when they don't plan on coming back to it for a while. I'm telling you this part slowly because I want you to feel it the way I felt it. Slowly. The way bad news always shows up, not in a flash, in a creep. I patted down the hall in my socks. The guest wing where my son-in-law Damon was staying with Caroline for the weekend, they'd come up from Wilmington for an early holiday visit. That wing was on the other side of the house. I didn't go that way. I went toward the kitchen because I just wanted water. But when I passed the back staircase that drops down toward the den, I heard a noise. A laugh. A woman's laugh, low, and underneath it a man's voice saying something soft. The den has a pellet stove and a leather sectional, and it's where I watch Eagles games on Sundays. It's the warmest room in the house in November. I knew immediately, in the bones of my feet way you know things, that what I was hearing wasn't friendly. It wasn't conversation. It was the sound of 2 people who think the rest of the house is asleep. I didn't go down those stairs like an old man. I went down them like the man I used to be at 30, when I had to throw a striking dispatcher out of my office in Bethlehem with my own 2 hands. Halfway down, I saw the firewood iron leaning against the railing where I'd left it that afternoon. I grabbed it. Don't ask me what I planned to do. I genuinely don't know. The den door was cracked. Through the crack, I saw my wife, Marlene. 41 years old now. in a silk robe she'd bought herself for our anniversary and told me cost $90 when I knew damn well it cost $600. The robe was open. Underneath her was Damon, my son-in-law, 29 years old, the man who'd asked me in this very house on the back porch 3 years ago for permission to marry my only daughter. He'd cried a little when I said yes. I remember thinking what a sweet kid he was. I gripped that iron so hard my fingers cramped. I started to push the door open, and that was when somebody hit me from the side, dragged me backwards 3 feet, and shoved me into the hall closet where Eleanor used to keep the Christmas linens. The door clicked shut behind us, a hand on my mouth. Smell of vanilla shampoo. Daddy. Caroline, whispering, "Don't. I've known since August. It's not what you think it is. It's so much filthier." I stood in that closet in my socks with a cast iron poker in my hand and felt every year of my life drop on me at once. She made me sit on a stack of old quilts. She crouched in front of me. The closet only had a sliver of light coming under the door, and I could see her face in pieces. An eye, a cheekbone, the line of her jaw, which is exactly her mother's. She was perfectly calm. The kind of calm that scared me more than crying would have. "Listen to me," she said. "You go in there right now, and they win. You hear me? They win. I need 3 more weeks. Give me 3 more weeks, and I'll hand you their entire lives on a plate. But if you walk through that door tonight with that poker in your hand, every single thing I've built falls apart, and I'll have done it all for nothing." I tried to talk. She put her finger on my lips like I was 8 years old. "I'm not asking, Daddy. I'm telling. Put the poker down." I put the poker down. My hand wouldn't stop shaking. I asked her, finally, in a voice that didn't sound like mine, what in the name of God was going on in my own house. She helped me up. We waited until we heard them go back upstairs separately. Marlene first, then Damon 10 minutes later, like professionals. Then she walked me down to the basement, to the workshop where I keep my table saw and my fishing tackle and a small bar fridge with Ewingling in it. She closed the basement door behind us, locked it, and pulled out a manila folder from inside an empty coffee can on my own workbench. She'd been hiding it in my house, in a coffee can, for weeks. "Sit down, Daddy." I sat. "I'm going to tell you everything, and you're not going to interrupt me, and you're not going to cry, and you're not going to pick up that phone and call anyone. Not Pete, not Jim Marsden at the firm, nobody. When I'm done, you're going to do exactly what I tell you. Are we clear?" I nodded. My mouth tasted like pennies. She opened the folder. Photographs first. A motel off Route 1 in Delaware. Damon's truck in the parking lot. Marlene's Lexus next to it. Date stamped. 8 different visits. June through October. Then bank statements. Marlene had been moving money. Not big chunks, $3,000 here, $5,200 there, every couple of weeks, out of our joint household account into an account at a credit union in her sister's name in Reading. Caroline had a forensic accountant pull it. Total over 14 months, $197,000 of my money, slowly drained, in the kind of small bites that don't trigger anything at the bank. That's not the part that matters, Daddy. She slid me another sheet. A photocopy of a notarized document. My name on it. My signature on it. Except the signature wasn't mine. It was a damn good forgery, I'll give Marlene that, but the loop on the T was wrong. She always made it too tall. The document was a durable power of attorney for healthcare, naming Marlene as my sole medical decision-maker. Dated last March. I'd never seen it before in my life. "What is this?" I said. "It's the document she'd use," Caroline said, "if you had a stroke and ended up in a hospital bed and the doctors needed somebody to decide whether or not to keep feeding you. She'd say, 'No, Daddy. They've talked about it. I have her on tape. I want to be honest with you about what happened to me in that moment.' Something inside my chest, some piece of machinery I didn't even know was still running, just shut off. Click. Done. I felt very cold and very clear. I don't think I'd felt that clear since 1987. Caroline pulled out one more thing, a small white prescription bottle. My blood pressure medication, lisinopril, 20 milligrams, the same bottle that had been on my bathroom counter for 2 years. 3 weeks ago, she said, I came up here on a Tuesday when she thought I was at a deposition. I swapped your bottle with an identical one I'd filled at a different pharmacy. I sent the old bottle to a lab in King of Prussia. Daddy, your pills had been replaced. The capsules in your bottle were the right size and the right color, but inside, half of them were lisinopril and half of them were something called clonidine, at a much higher dose than you'd ever be prescribed. Mixed together, day after day. The cardiologist I showed it to said you'd have had a syncopal event within 90 days. You'd have fallen, you'd have hit your head, or been driving. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I did. God help me, I did. God help me, I did. Who? I said. Damon's a registered pharmacy technician. Did you know that? I didn't. He worked at a CVS in Newark while he was in business school. He still has the credentials. I'd been making him eggs in the morning. I'd loaned him my truck to move his mother's furniture. I'd put $20,000 into his and Caroline's down payment on the townhouse in Wilmington. I told him at the rehearsal dinner that I'd never had a son and that I was glad to have one now. I asked Caroline, and I had to ask twice because I didn't recognize my own voice the first time, why she hadn't gone straight to the police. She closed the folder. She took my hand. Hers was warmer than mine. Because, Daddy, the medical power of attorney is forged. But if I take this to the cops on Monday, what happens? They charge Marlene with forgery, maybe attempted fraud. Damon, they can't actually prove he's the one who tampered with the pills. He's slick. He'll cry on the stand. He'll say he had no idea what was in those bottles. He'll say Marlene must have done it herself. And Marlene, Daddy, listen to me. Marlene signed a prenuptial agreement with you in 2018 that has a fidelity clause and a clause about criminal conduct, but the way it's written, if she's only convicted of misdemeanor forgery, she still gets the spousal share of the household assets accrued during marriage. That's $900,000 in the joint accounts plus half the appreciation on the Bryn Mawr house. She walks out of jail in 18 months with 7 figures and a tan. And Damon goes back to Wilmington and asks me for a divorce settlement, and because Delaware is what it is, he gets a piece of the townhouse you helped pay for. They lose nothing, Daddy. They get a slap and a payday. She leaned forward. But if we let it run, if we let her think it's working, if we let them sign their names on the next document, the one I've been waiting for, the one she's been trying to get you to sign for 2 months, then I can put both of them away for 15 years apiece, and I can claw back every cent. And Damon can't ever practice anything in this state again. The next document, she explained, was a revision to my living trust. Marlene had been hounding me about it since Labor Day. Gentle at first, then less gentle. Restructuring, she called it. For tax purposes, she said. Her cousin's husband was an estate attorney in Conshohocken who'd be happy to take a look. I've been putting it off because Jim Marsden, my actual lawyer for 26 years, had told me back in September that it looked fishy and to wait. Caroline had been working with Jim the whole time. Jim had drafted, very carefully, a counter version of the trust documents. The version Marlene wanted me to sign would shift control of the trust to a co-trustee, herself, in the event of my incapacitation. The version Jim and Caroline had cooked up looked identical on the cover but had been larded with poison pills in the appendices. An automatic clawback clause triggered by criminal conduct. A personal indemnity assumed by any co-trustee for unsecured liabilities of the trust holding entities, including a real estate partnership in the Poconos that I'd quietly wound down 2 years ago and whose remaining tax exposure was around $400,000. If Marlene signed the version Caroline had prepared, she'd be personally on the hook for that $400,000 the moment she was charged with anything indictable. She wouldn't just lose her shot at my money. She'd owe me money. For the rest of her life. Every paycheck she ever earned again garnished. 3 weeks, Caroline said. She wants you to sign it the day after Thanksgiving. She has the notary already lined up, the cousin's husband. Until then, Daddy, you eat what she cooks. You take what I'll give you, which is the real pills. I'll do the swap every Sunday night when she's at her wine club, and you do not let on. Not a flicker. You hear me? Not a flicker. I sat there in my own basement and looked at my daughter, and I'll tell you something. I saw Eleanor in her face. I saw the woman I married in 1979 looking back at me through our daughter's eyes, telling me to be a man about this. To wait. To play it cold. I asked her one question. Sweetheart, how long have you been doing this by yourself? She finally cracked, just a little. Her eyes went wet and she wiped them quick with the back of her wrist. Since August 4th, she said. I followed her to the motel. I sat in my car in that parking lot for 2 hours trying to decide if I was hallucinating. Then I drove to Jim Marsden's house in Wayne and I rang his doorbell at 11 o'clock at night and I asked him to help me save my father. I nodded. I didn't trust myself to say anything. She kissed me on the forehead the way Eleanor used to. 3 weeks, Daddy. Just 3 weeks. Then we burn it all down. I went back upstairs at 1 in the morning. Marlene was already in bed, breathing slow and fake the way liars breathe. I slid in next to her. She murmured something about me being cold. I told her I'd gone for water. She patted my hand. Her hand was the same hand it had been yesterday. That was almost the worst part. The next morning at breakfast, I watched her butter my toast. I watched her hum a little tune while she did it. I watched Damon come downstairs in one of my old Penn State sweatshirts, a sweatshirt I'd given him personally 2 Christmases ago, and clap me on the shoulder and call me Pop, the way he'd been calling me Pop since the engagement. I smiled at him. I thanked him for the firewood he brought up from the woodpile. I asked Marlene if she remembered to refill my prescription. She said she had, sweetheart. It was right there on the counter, and I should take it with juice, not coffee. You know how it is with your stomach. I took the pill. I put it under my tongue. I drank the juice. When I went into my office to make a phone call, I spit it into a tissue and dropped the tissue into a baggie Caroline had given me and put the baggie in the back of my desk drawer. By the end of 3 weeks, I had 19 of them. Evidence. I'm not going to walk you minute by minute to those 3 weeks because if I do this video, it's going to be 6 hours long. But I want you to know what it cost me. Every morning, I had to kiss the woman who was poisoning me. Every Sunday at dinner, I had to listen to my son-in-law tell stories about his week and laugh in the right places. One Tuesday in mid-November, Marlene took my hand at the kitchen table and asked me, in this soft voice, whether I'd thought any more about the trust restructuring. She said her cousin's husband had a window the Friday after Thanksgiving. She said it'd be such a relief to have it done before the holidays. She said it'd give her peace of mind. I looked her in the eye and I said, "Peace of mind is important, honey. Let's do it." I watched something flicker in her face, not love, hunger. The kind a coyote has in its eyes in February. Caroline and Damon came up the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. We had 11 people at the table on Thursday. Me, Marlene, Caroline, Damon, my brother Pete, and his wife Marianne from outside Lancaster, my old dispatcher Howie from the company, who's been a friend for 35 years, Howie's wife Donna, Marlene's sister Janelle, and her husband Greg from Reading. The same Janelle whose name was on the credit union account, and Marlene's mother Pearl, who's 82 and has no idea about any of it. I carved the turkey. Damon stood up to toast me. He said, "To Pop, the strongest man I know, the man who taught me what family means." Caroline lifted her glass and looked me dead in the eye and didn't blink. I lifted mine. I said, "To family, the one we're born with and the ones we earn." Marlene's hand was on my thigh under the table. I let it stay there. Friday morning, 10 o'clock. The notary was scheduled to arrive at the house at 11. Marlene's cousin's husband, a man named Reggie, who I'd met exactly once at our wedding, and who had the kind of handshake that tells you he's lying before he even opens his mouth. Reggie showed up early, at 10:30, in a Lexus the same model as Marlene's, and I caught the look they exchanged at the front door. Caroline saw it too. She squeezed my elbow as she walked past me into the kitchen carrying a coffee cake she'd baked at 6 in the morning, specifically so she'd have a reason to be in the room when the papers came out. Damon was there too. He'd taken the day off from his consulting job in Wilmington, said he wanted to be supportive, said this was a big day for the family. He sat at the dining room table with a yellow legal pad and his MBA school pen and a face like a man at a closing. Marlene set out 4 glasses of orange juice. Reggie set out the documents, 63 pages, bound in a navy blue folder with a gold clasp. He gave me a 1-page summary. He said, "Mr. Brennan, this is just a tidying up. Most of this is boilerplate from your existing trust documents. There's just a few signature blocks we'll need from you and from Mrs. Brennan, and we'll be on our way before lunch." I made a show of putting on my reading glasses. I made a show of squinting at the cover page. I made a show of being a tired old man who didn't really understand what he was looking at. I asked slowly what page the actual signature lines were on. Reggie said, "Page 14, page 22, page 58. I flipped to 14. I picked up the pen. I held it over the line. My hand shook on cue, the way Caroline and I had practiced in the basement 2 nights before. Marlene leaned over me. Her perfume was the same perfume she'd worn the night I met her. "Honey," she said, "do you want me to guide your hand?" I looked up at her. I looked at her the way a man looks at his wife on a Friday morning in his own dining room. I smiled at her. I said, "No, sweetheart, I've got it. I signed page 14. I signed page 22. I signed page 42. I signed page 58. Then I slid the document across to her, and I watched her sign the co-trustee designation on page 61. I watched Damon sign as a witness on page 62. They both signed with the kind of flourish people use when they think they've just won. Reggie stamped them with his notary seal. He gathered up the originals. He said, "Congratulations, Mrs. Brennan." He shook my hand, that lying handshake, and he left. Marlene poured herself a champagne. At 10:53 in the morning, she poured one for Damon too. They clinked glasses. They actually clinked glasses in my dining room in front of me, while my daughter stood in the doorway from the kitchen with a coffee cake in her hands. "To new beginnings," Marlene said. Damon said, "To family." I stood up. I took off my reading glasses. I folded them carefully and set them on the table. "Marlene," I said, "honey, sit down." She didn't sit down. She laughed a little the way she did when she didn't understand a joke. "Teddy, what? Sit down." "Something in my voice." She sat down. "Something in my voice?" She sat down. Damon sat down. Caroline walked into the dining room with the coffee cake and set it in the middle of the table and pulled out her phone. I said, "The papers you just signed, they're not what Reggie told you they were." Marlene's face didn't change yet. She was still trying to process the word Reggie. "My attorney," I said. "Jim Marsden, who's been my attorney since 1998. He wrote those documents, not your cousin's husband. The cover sheet was substituted last night by my daughter while you were asleep. Reggie's a notary. Reggie does what the document in front of him tells him to do. He notarized exactly what I needed him to notarize. You just signed an instrument that holds you personally liable for the unsecured tax exposure of Brennan Pocono Holdings. About $412,000 at last estimate. Damon, you witnessed it, and your name is now on a federal tax lien chain. That's its own party." Damon's mouth opened and then closed. Marlene started to stand up. I held up one finger. "I'm not done." Caroline pressed play on her phone. My wife's voice came out of the speaker, tinny but clear, recorded in our own kitchen 6 weeks earlier. Caroline had planted a recorder under the spice rack. Marlene was talking to Damon. The two of them were laughing. Marlene was saying, "Once he signs the trust, all I need is for him to fall once. Just one good fall. The Clonidine will do it. The doctors won't even look twice at a 68-year-old man with a bad back." Damon's voice, "And then you sell the Bryn Mawr house?" Marlene's voice, "Then I sell everything." Caroline stopped the recording. I watched my wife. I watched my son-in-law. I watched both of them realize, at exactly the same second, that the floor had been gone the whole time, and they'd just been falling. Marlene said my name. She said it 3 times. "Teddy, Teddy, Teddy," like a child who's done something bad. She tried to grab my hand. I pulled it back. "My pills," I said. "All 19 of them. I never took a single one of yours. Caroline swapped them 3 weeks ago. Jim has the lab report. The district attorney has the lab report. The district attorney has the lab report. The district attorney has the recording. The district attorney has the bank records out of your sister's credit union, by the way. Janelle's not in trouble. She didn't know. But you are, honey. You are in a tremendous amount of trouble." Damon stood up. He started toward the front door. Caroline stepped in front of him. She's 5'4" and he's 6'1", and she didn't move an inch. "Sit down, Damon," she said. There are 2 officers in an unmarked sedan at the end of the driveway. There's another one in the backyard by the tool shed. They've been there since 9:45 this morning. You are not going anywhere. I'd never heard her use that voice. It was Eleanor's voice. It was my own voice. It was my own voice. It was a voice that comes down through families like a piece of furniture you don't realize you've inherited until you sit in it. I picked up my phone. I pressed the call button on a number that was already queued up. I said, "Detective Halloran?" "Yes, we're done. Come on in." The arrest itself wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting. There was no violence. Two officers in plain clothes walked through my front door at 11:17 in the morning the day after Thanksgiving, and they read Marlene her rights at my dining room table while my daughter's coffee cake sat untouched between us. Marlene cried. She begged. She told me she loved me. She told me Damon had pressured her, that she'd been weak, that she tried to back out and he threatened her. Damon said something almost identical about her in almost the same words from across the table. They started arguing in front of the cops. A detective named Halloran, big guy, used to play offensive line at Temple, looked at me and almost smiled. They took Marlene out the front door first. She kept turning back, looking for me. I didn't look up. I looked at the coffee cake. They took Damon out next. He was crying by then, real crying, snot on his face. He looked at Caroline and said, "Baby, baby, please." Caroline didn't blink. After the door closed for the second time, the house was quieter than it had been since Eleanor died. Caroline sat down next to me. I noticed, for the first time, that she had flour on her sleeve from the coffee cake she'd been baking at 6 in the morning while her husband was upstairs in our guest bed. I put my arm around her. She put her head on my shoulder. We sat like that for a long time. Outside, a wind came up and rattled the storm windows. The dogwood out front, the one Eleanor planted in '94, dropped the last of its leaves all at once, like it had been waiting for permission. Eventually, Caroline said, "Daddy, I have to tell you something." I said, "Okay." She said, "I'm pregnant. 11 weeks. I've known since right before I figured out about Marlene. I didn't tell you because I needed you to focus." I looked at her. I felt something break open in my chest that I thought was locked up for good. "It's a girl," she said. "I'm naming her Eleanor. I want to tell you something, and I want you to hear me, because I think most of you watching are around my age, give or take a decade. People my age, people who built things, people who raised kids, people who buried spouses and got up the next morning and went to work anyway. We have a tendency to think that our soft spots are weaknesses. We think that loving somebody and trusting them is something the world will eventually punish us for. And the world does, sometimes. The world did in my case. I let a woman into my house who saw my grief and decided to feed on it. I let a young man into my family who saw my generosity and decided to use it as a ladder. But here's what I learned, and what I want you to know. The same softness that let them in is the same softness that let my daughter spend 3 months in the dark by herself, without a single complaint, building a wall around her father with her own bare hands. Caroline didn't save me because I was strong. She saved me because she'd been loved properly, by her mother and by me, for 36 years, and she knew what that looked like, and she wasn't going to let anybody take it from us. Marlene is awaiting trial. Her lawyers already tried to plead her down twice. The DA isn't budging. With the recordings, the lab report, the forged power of attorney, and the trust documents, she's looking at 12 to 15 years. Damon took a plea last month for 10. They both have to pay restitution out of any future earnings for the rest of their lives. Every time either of them collects a paycheck from now until they die, a piece of it comes back to me. Or, more accurately, it goes into a college fund I set up in November for a baby girl who's due in May. Caroline moved back home in February. She and the baby are going to live with me until she's ready to figure out what comes next. The townhouse in Wilmington's already sold. Damon's name came off the deed faster than you'd believe. I'm sitting on my back porch right now, where Marlene used to bring me chicken and rice and the dogwood's about to bloom. I'm 68 years old. I have a grandbaby coming. I have a daughter who turned out to be the toughest person I've ever met. I have a house that finally feels like mine again. If you're out there listening to this and you've got somebody in your life who you can't quite figure out, who makes you feel a little smaller every day, who tells you you're getting forgetful when you don't feel forgetful, who reorganizes your medicine cabinet when you didn't ask, who gets a little impatient when you ask the same question twice on purpose just to see what they'll say, listen to me. Don't be a hero. Don't confront. Don't yell. Get quiet. Get a lawyer. Call somebody who loves you and tell them what you're seeing. The people who go after men like me, they count on us being too proud to ask for help. Don't give them that. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button. Subscribe to Revenge Echoes. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and tell me about somebody in your life who turned out to be stronger than you ever knew. My name's Teddy Brennan. I'm still here. And the people who tried to make sure I wasn't, well, they aren't. I've been thinking about this story every morning since they took Marlene out my front door, and I want to tell you what I've learned. Not because I think I've got anything figured out at 68 that I didn't have figured out at 50, but because I think there's a kind of cause and effect in life that you only see when you're standing in the wreckage looking back. Marlene didn't wake up one morning and decide to poison her husband. She got there one small permission at a time. She let herself flirt with Damon at a 4th of July barbecue. She let herself drive to a motel off Route 1. She let herself open a credit union account in her sister's name and move $3,000 into it just to see if I'd notice. I didn't. So she moved $5,000 more. Every time the world didn't punish her, she took it as permission to go further. That's how a person ends up grinding clonidine into capsules at her own kitchen counter. Not in one decision. In 1,000 small ones, every single one of which she could have walked away from. And Damon, that boy I made eggs for, he had the same staircase, just shorter. He let himself accept a $20,000 gift from a man he didn't actually respect. He let himself wear my sweatshirt. He let himself call me Pop. Each one of those was a chance to feel a small shame, and each time he refused to feel it, he made the next betrayal cheaper. By the time he was witnessing a forged trust document at my dining room table, the wrong choice was easier than the right one. He practiced. Caroline went the other way down the same staircase. When she sat in that motel parking lot in August and watched her husband walk out of room 12, she had every reason to scream. She didn't. She had every reason to call me right then and let me hurt the way she was hurting. She didn't. She drove to Jim Marsden's house at 11 at night, and she did the harder thing, the slower thing, the thing that asked her to carry a secret for 3 months while she carried my granddaughter under her heart. Every day she chose the discipline over the relief. Every day that discipline got a little easier. By the morning Reggie put the documents on my dining room table, Caroline had practiced courage so many times in a row that it didn't even shake her hand. That's the thing I want anybody listening to take away from this. The people who hurt you are usually people who got tired of doing right in small ways. The people who save you are usually people who got patient about doing right in small ways. You don't fall into a betrayal and you don't fall into a rescue. You walk to both, one step at a time. And the only thing that decides which one you end up at is whether you let yourself off the hook on a Tuesday afternoon when nobody's watching. Be honest on the Tuesdays. Be patient on the Wednesdays. Love the people who love you back loud enough that they hear it. The rest sorts itself out.